Hello, greetings to everyone. Today I have the Honorable Eskinder Nega with me. This conversation with Eskinder was supposed to be had for Amhara Genocide Awareness Month, but because we have made a promise to you all to hold this conversation, we wanted to keep our word and continue the conversation via recording to ensure that his voice is heard as clearly as possible and that we have clear network. This conversation is going to focus on primarily on the humanitarian aspect of the Amhara struggle. We want to know what everyday suffering, survival, and the pain of the Amhara people is like. We want to understand what is happening to ordinary families and what has been fundamentally misunderstood about the Amhara people, the prosecution and the genocide globally, in ways we can pursue justice, ways that we can vocalize what's happening to our people globally. And that's what we're going to focus on today with Eskinder. He needs no introduction. You all know him. He is an advocate, a politician, a leader, an organizer, a freedom fighter. Eskinder Nega. Last time we were here, was publicly speaking, I got feedback that I didn't ask how you were doing. So I want to ask how you are. You have been under pressure for the past 4 years or so, even before then, but under tremendous pressure the past few years. And people want to know how you are doing mentally and spiritually in this moment. How are you, Eskinder?
Hi, Malada. Well, thank you. Thank you for your concern. Thank you for the concern of the people who asked how I'm doing. Thanks to God, I'm doing fine. I'm doing terribly well. So it's the struggle that matters ultimately. For those of us in the struggle, we tend to gauge our wellness in how the struggle is doing. And thanks to God, the struggle is doing well. We are the government, despite its superior forces, has not been able to defeat the Amhara struggle. In fact, to the contrary, it's struggling to survive. And as long as that's the case, I guess it could be said that we're all doing well. So thanks to be God, everything is going well, and I hope and I pray that the end will be good. The end will be well, not only for us, not only for me, but for the nation as a whole.
Thank you so much, Eskinder. That is good to hear. I'm glad you started it on a encouraging note that will increase our spirits, our morale, because that is what is necessary. And I would like to add that your endurance, your dedication is truly admirable, and it inspires all of us. So to transition to our conversation, you have argued for years that what's happening to the Amhara people.
Let me interrupt and make a point here.
Oh, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
All right, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
But I just wanted to remark a thing or two. About the saying, about you saying that you admire my efforts. But I think I should add, and this is not false modesty into the play, but I think it has gone worse. So we have this terrible connection. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. So I wanted to remark about the courage of the youth that have carried the burden of the struggle more than I. Those youth, the youth who are mostly in their early 20s, who are fighting at the war front with bare necessities in terms of arms, in terms of clothing, in terms of food. And it's just an incredible story, because this is a struggle that we are conducting with scarcity. Amharas do not have many friends, whether geopolitically or domestically. So we have to struggle. This struggle is being conducted, like I said, using bare necessities. We have virtually nothing except our spirit and the truth that the truth that has driven us to fight this regime. And I admire them. They deserve our admiration more so than those of us, who are in a leadership role. So I think I should remark about them. I should say a word about them before you proceed. So that's what I wanted to say, Malada. We have a youth that have carried the burden of this, that are carrying the burden of this struggle. And they're doing it with the barest of of necessities that you could possibly conceive, with almost nothing in terms of arms, like I said, nothing in terms of nourishment, and yet they persist. They persist and are winning. And I should also add that they're doing this not only as humans. There's the blessing of the Lord in the story. So I think I'm just trying to say that there's so much that has to be admired, and I can't compare it to what they're doing.
Thank you so much, Eskinder. Of course, they are the core and the foundation and the backbone of this struggle. We owe everything to them, their sacrifice. History will remember them, and we will continue to honor them. As you say, many of them in their early 20s, late teens, 18, 19, and early 20s. And thank you for giving them the credit and the honor that they absolutely deserve, Eskinder. To transition back to our conversation regarding the humanitarian situation that's happening right now, I want to take you back to the foundation that you have argued for years that what is happening to Amharas is not a random act of violence, but more systemic and act of genocide. For people listening globally, what makes the Amhara case specifically a genocide in your view?
Wow, that's a very, I could come up with a very long response regarding this question. But like you said, I liked the way that you phrased it, because this is not your typical systemic violence that's perpetrated by the state in most African countries, or in many developing countries. More so than that, this is a genocide that's posed by the regime on the basis of ethnicity. And there's a fundamental difference between the two, because had it been just systemic violence directed against human rights, we could have struggled against it through nonviolent means. We could have resorted to civil disobedience rather than armed struggle. But this is different in nature than the typical authoritarian violence that's being used against the populace in most African countries. Now, what makes it a genocide? Well, we have these early warning signs that has been defined by the UN, and they are things like stigmatization and labeling and displacements and violence, so all directed by the state against a specific group with the intention of So in Ethiopia we have two kinds of violence. When it comes to the general population, all Ethiopians, there's violence perpetrated by the state against all Ethiopians on the basis of their democratic rights. So we have a violent state against all Ethiopians. No, that should be clear, and this is the norm in Africa. In most African countries, it's not not throughout the whole Africa, but in most African countries. But then we have a specific kind of violence directed against the Amharas on the basis of their ethnicity. Now, that's a different kind of violence. So in Ethiopia, we have 80 different ethnic groups. Now, the Amharas have been singled out as the bad guys of history. This makes their case unique. And the other 79 ethnic groups have been categorized as victims of these of this bad guy of history, this bad ethnic guy of history. So on the one hand, we have the Amharas and the rest of the ethnic groups, divided by the state. So this makes fundamentally when it comes to the violence, this makes the Amhara case unique. So Amharas are being identified by the state on the basis of their ethnicity, like I said, as not merely enemies of the state, but also as enemies of all other ethnic groups. And on that basis, they have been labeled, they have been stigmatized, they have been attacked, they have been displaced, and violence has been perpetrated against them on the basis of their ethnicity, irrespective of their political stand, of their political leanings, of their political beliefs. But this is not happening against other ethnic groups. But this is not to say that ethnic violence has not been perpetrated against other ethnic groups. There has been cases where other ethnic groups have been attacked on the basis of their ethnicity, but not by the state. But because when the ethnic attacks that have been, that has happened against other ethnic groups, that has been done by non-state actors, while the attacks on the basis of ethnicity against the Amharas has been done, especially over the past 7 years. Has been perpetuated, has been engaged by the state. It's the state that sponsors the violence on the basis of ethnicity against the Amharas. So that makes the Amhara case unique. And when the state is engaged on attacking its citizens on the basis of ethnicity, then that, according to the definition that has been spelled and laid out by the UN, that becomes the basis of genocide. That becomes dangerous. That has to be confronted, in a unique way than the other question, the other democratic questions. So this is the case of the Amharas. The state is engaged in violence against them on the basis of their ethnicity, and they are being attacked in mass. They're not being singled out for it. They're not being individually singled out or attacked. They're being attacked on a mass scale on the basis of their ethnicity. And the question is, could this kind of violence that's being perpetuated by the state, by the government, be tackled on the basis of non-violence? And there's no precedent for it. When we look back in history, we could not find a single instance in which violence by the state, against the populace, against the citizens on the basis of ethnicity, had been defended, had been fended off through non-violent means, including civil disobedience. Yes, but like I said, for other democratic questions, yes, it could be tackled on the basis of civil disobedience, and it has been successful. Even we could cite the US, and we could cite the Soviet Union. We could cite many other cases, even in the Arab world, in the Middle East, where even very violent, almost semi-totalitarian, or even totalitarian states have been overthrown after through civil disobedience, through peaceful means, with what we have now. So the point is, the violence that's being waged by the government against the Amhara people on the basis of ethnicity has to be fended off, has to be defended by any means necessary. Mm-hmm. And we could not find in history a precedent in which genocide had been neutralized, has been defended on the basis on non-violent basis. So the only way that we could defend ourselves, the only rational way, perhaps even instinctively, this is an instinctive response. We have to defend ourselves by force of arms, unfortunately, against violence on the basis of ethnicity. So this is what makes the Amhara case different. The state is attacking us, not on the basis of our political leanings, of our political allegiance, on the basis of our political beliefs, but it's attacking us in mass on the basis of our ethnicity. So we have to defend ourselves.
All right. Thank you. You put it well. Eskinder, you laid out clearly. There is a clear distinction between the standard sort of violence that is often inflicted on civilian, irrespective of their ethnic background. But what makes it unique for Amharas is that Amharas are targeted solely for being Amharas, and that is obviously perpetrated by the state. We could look at the justification that is used through the Constitution, the ethnic federalism order, and the need to rectify past injustices, meaning injustices supposedly committed by the Amhara people, which justifies much of what is happening to Amharas today. We have tremendous evidence. Based on what you say today, we have massacres that are documented, or pogroms that are documented dating back at least to 1991. And I say 1991, 1990 because that is what we usually find when we look at Western-based documentation. There was a Human Rights Watch report on Arbagugu and Bedeno. And in that report, it stated that the Amharas who were victims were settlers. And they were settled in that area to tame the political movement within that community. It was a government policy that settled Amharas in that region. It basically justified the act of genocide that was committed against Amharas. And we still see that today, Eskinder. We still hear, when we read the news, we hear intercommunal violence. We hear conflict. We hear civilians targeted. Even though we have this tremendous evidence that this is a genocide, and it is because it is on the basis of ethnicity. What does it take to correct the narrative? Why isn't it acknowledged by the international community?
All right, let me add, to the things that you said about ethnic attacks that go back to 1991. The history of ethnic attacks in the 20th century does not, begin in 1991. It goes all the way back to the 1930s, to the mid 1930s, when the Italians had invaded Ethiopia. In fact, in the 20th century, the first ethnic-based attacks by a state actor was perpetrated by the Italians. Now, because I have to go through this briefly,
okay,
so that it will help us to understand what's happening in the country now.
Okay.
Because the origin of this ethnic attacks that's happening today is really the Italian rule in the mid 1930s. So what happened was, when the Italians were were preparing to avenge their defeat in Adwa in the late 19th century by the Ethiopians, because Mussolini, the fascist party, had come to power in Italy and was saying that it would restore the Roman Empire, it would restore the Roman prestige to the Italian state. The first thing that they said was that the shame on Italian history is their defeat in Africa by a backward. Their defeat in Ethiopia by the Ethiopians, by backward Ethiopians, and the Italians, the Italian pride, the Italian prestige has to be restored by avenging that defeat in Adwa. So the first thing that the fascist party did was it prepared to try to re-invade Ethiopia. So while they were doing this, while they were preparing this, the first thing that they did was they tried to set up. They tried to weaken Ethiopia internally. So about 2 years before they invaded Ethiopia in 1936, about 2 years before they actually invaded Ethiopia, what they did was they started doing this propaganda work in Ethiopia, and the line that they infused into the Ethiopian body politics at that point was to say that Ethiopia is an empire. Ethiopia is an Amhara empire, that it's not a genuine nation state, that it was created in this scramble for Africa by colonialists. And that this colonial rule that has been imposed by the Amharas against non-Amharas in Ethiopia has to be dismantled, because it's very backward. It's their claim was that Amharas are too backward to possess an empire. So what they said was that they will come in and liberate the non-Amhara populace from the Amhara colonizers. And they used 2 languages to do this, by the way. They actually 3 languages. So they were dropping leaflets all over at least in the countryside, especially in the areas bordering their colonial entities in the Horn of Africa. That's to say, Italia, Somaliland, and Eritrea. So they were doing this. They were dropping leaflets to this effect, which had these contents in the Tigrinya-speaking areas, and they were also dropping these leaflets, which had the same content in the Somali-speaking areas and the Oromo-speaking areas. So this first idea that Ethiopia, that in Ethiopia there's a colonizer and there's a colonized people, was introduced by the Italians. So after doing this very intensive propaganda work for about 2 years, they invaded the country, like I said, in 1936, and they succeeded in occupying the country for 5 years. In those 5 years, there was rebellion. There was resistance by Ethiopians, mostly in the Amhara mountains, in the Amhara region, or what we call the Amhara region now. And they intensified the propaganda because they could not defeat the insurgency, the resistance that sprang up because of their invasion, because they were holding the country directly. They were able to recruit tens of thousands of people on the basis of this line, on the basis of this propaganda. That's when this idea that Amharas are distinct, are, like I said, the bad guys of history, was really introduced in Ethiopia. And after they left, after 5 years, after they were defeated 5 years later, unfortunately, what happened in the post-liberation era was that this was ignored. This was hushed up. This was everyone pretended that this had never happened. And in those 5 years, by the way, in the 5 years that the Italians had occupied the countries, there was ethnic based attacks against the Amharas by non-state actors that were set up by the Italians, that were organized by the Amharas and the state itself, the Italian state itself. That's when ethnic-based attacks against the Amharas started. So this was like 80 years ago. So this should be this should be clear. So this ethnicity, this infusion of ethnicity in our politics is part of the colonial project. It's a colonial. It's a heritage of the colonial era, both in Ethiopia and in Africa. So this should be clear. So that's when first Amharas were extensively victimized on the basis of their ethnicity, because what the Italians did was really terrible. And I shouldn't call them Italians, by the way. I'm making a mistake in this regard. I should specify that they're fascist Italians, because the Italians are much more than this. We know the Roman Empire, and we know that the Italians are not defined by the fascists, by the fascists. So I should. Yeah, so I think I would be making a mistake to say that the Italians were doing this. Anyway, so fascist Italy is really the culprits in this regard. They brought this divisive politics, this divide and rule tactic on the basis of ethnicity into Ethiopia, and because it was not tackled properly in the post-liberation era, because it was ignored, and because everyone thought that once the Italians left, their legacy of divisive politics would somehow disappear, was really a huge mistake. It should have been tackled. There should have been an accounting of what had happened in those 5 years. So I think in that regard, a huge mistake was done, because what happened was those who were responsible for violence, and those who were victims were forced to exist with no accounting taking place. And what happened was after about 2 decades of quiets. This is between about 1940. Ethiopia was liberated again. The Italians were expelled in 1941, and between that time and 1960, this is the European calendar. For 2 decades, there was quiet in Ethiopian politics. Nothing really happened. Nothing really happened. That was a quiet period in our history. But then there was a coup attempt in 1960, and that coup attempt, a famous coup attempt against the emperor, against the imperial regime. And after that coup attempt was defeated, a student movement sprang up. And in that student movement, this divisive politics that was introduced by the Italians was revived and revived. So actually, this attempt to hush up, this attempt to pretend that nothing really happened between Ethiopians, that the problem was between Ethiopians and Italians, that Ethiopians were all against the Italians, was proved wrong, because it was just it lay dormant. And then it revived. But had it been tackled at that point, had there been a real attempt, had there been a real effort at national reconciliation, admitting that there have been some parts in the population, some parts of Ethiopians who had brought in, who had acceded, who had accepted that narrative that was introduced by the Italians. I think it would not have revived again through the student movement. That's what happened. Now it was, of course, during the student movement, it was not worded in the same manner. It was expressed by the Italians. Now it was, it had left-wing cliches. It had left-wing words. It was it was sweetened by left-wing politics, and it became this narrative that was introduced by the Italians became, a question of nations and nationalities. Pressure. It became, it was repackaged.
Yeah, repackaged.
In progressive words, in progressive terms, in progressive politics terms, but really the content was the same. And the next for the next 10 years, another 10 years, it really poisoned the youth. The youth, a very activist youth at the time, I should add, very politicized. This was a period in which, hip hop, the hip hop culture is very popular now. Back then, it was politics that was popular. The youth was into politics. This was a period, not only in Ethiopia, by the way, this was a worldwide phenomenon. This was during the anti-Vietnam movement in the US, and this was during the worldwide student activism. That was prevalent in the 1960s, and the Ethiopian student movement was also part of that, in a sense. But like I said, the content of what they had to say, the prism through which they saw Ethiopian politics was really what the Italians said. They picked up from the Italians. So another decade of unrests. Of this build-up of narrative, that was really what the student movement was about. There was a build-up of this narrative that pitted the Amharas as the bad guys of history, and then eventually in the early 1970s, in 1974, revolution took place. A very sudden, unexpected revolution took place, and the imperial regime was overthrown. And out of the student movement sprang up these ethnic-based liberation movements. And, for the first time after the Italians left, for the first time after 30 years after the Italians left, for the first time again, Amharas began to be attacked on the basis of their ethnicity. So this was the second time in the 20th century that Amharas were attacked on the basis of their ethnicity. But the point that we have to note here is that the state was not involved. There was the military regime at that point. So even though ethnic attacks on the basis of their ethnicity, Amharas were being attacked on the basis of their ethnicity, the state was not responsible. In fact, the state was defending the Amharas against attack on the basis of their ethnicity, but non-state actors were attacking them on the basis of their ethnicity, and we could not. And as long as the state is not concerned, is not in the picture, as long as the state is not the primary actor in any ethnic-based attack, we could not really call it genocide. We could call it a genocidal act. We could call it, a crime against humanity, but really, we could not call it a real genocidal threat, because a genocidal threat or a genocidal act could only be enacted, could only be effected by the state. Without the involvement of the state, no genocide could really take place. So that's one of the essential elements of what a genocide is. It's the involvement of the state. So even though Amharas were being attacked on the basis of their ethnicity ever since the imperial regime was overthrown in the early 1970s, between that period and the accession of the EPRDF, like I said, in the early 1990s for a decade and a half, for 17 years. We did not, no one said that, there was this genocidal threat against the Amharas. Yes, theoretically there was, but as far as capability was concerned, none of the insurgents that were doing this had the capability to execute, to really commit genocide against the Amharas on a massive scale. On the scale that we had seen genocide in Rwanda. So this was in the 17 years during which the military was in power during the Dark time, we should note that there was systemic violence against the Amhara on the basis of their ethnicity by insurgents. And this continued after the rise of the TPLF to power in 1991. So this trend continued right up to the time that the present regime, the regime that's been headed by Abiy Ahmed, came to power. The 27 years, or about the 3 decades that the TPLF was in power. So, if you look at at the arch of history. If you look at the long arm of history. So we have these ethnic-based attacks that had taken place against the Amharas between the early 1930s up to 2000. Up to the time that the Abiy regime came to power. This, I think, in the European calendar, this was 2018.
Because power in 2018.
18. Okay, because in the European calendar it's 2000. It's 2010. So that's what comes to my mind immediately, because we have two different calendars, and since I'm living in Ethiopia, the European calendar is somewhat distant from me. So this was like 2018. So between 1936 and 2018, we should note that there has been cases, many instances in which Amharas have been attacked on the basis of their ethnicity. By non-state actors, and that's an important point. And none of us had claimed, that the Amharas at that point, that even though we had recognized that this was happening, and at some point, we had recognized that the state could be involved in this, and then the nature of the problem, and that the nature of the problem will change if the state is involved. None of us were claiming that there was an immediate genocidal threat against the Amharas. We were just, especially for the past 30 years, in the time that the TPLF was in power, we concentrated on rooting out the threats by fighting ethnic politics, by fighting to end ethnic politics, because we knew that this threat of genocide had really come from ethnic politics. So we were fighting the TPLF on the basis of democratic questions. We thought that by democratizing Ethiopia, that we could somehow disengage ethnicity from politics and root out the genocidal threat. But unfortunately, what happened was, even though eventually we had successfully, TPLF had left power, had been overthrown through non-violent means. Unfortunately, what happened is, it's the same. It's part of the regime that continued. The regime was not overthrown. It was a faction within the regime that was overthrown. But hello, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still listening. Yes, I'm still here.
Yeah. So the system was not overthrown, but a faction of the system was thrown in 2018, and that same ethnic politics was that ethnic based, state based, state sponsored ethnic politics was carried on, and unfortunately, it's the faction within the ruling establishment that had more grievances. That had supposedly more grievances against the Amharas that came to power. So this was the TPLF had claimed that they have grievances against the Amharas, but the Oromo, the extremist Oromo elements within the ruling party claimed that they had even more grievance against the Amharas, and it's those elements that came to power. Mm-hmm. And when that extremist element came to power, unfortunately, what happened was the state became a primary agent in the ethnic attacks that was taking place against the Amharas. Like I said, even during the rule of the TPLF, Amharas were being attacked on the basis of their ethnicity throughout the country. That was given, but the state was not the primary actor. It was not sponsoring those attacks. But when this regime came, the table turned, unfortunately, and the state became the primary agent, the primary sponsor of those attacks, especially the Oromo regional government. And I should also add, if you go to this region that we have bordering the Sudan, we have a region called a sub-region that we call Gumus. So these regional governments. These regional governments became the primary sponsors of those ethnic-based attacks, and since these are state actors, like I said, that were engaged in attacking us on the basis of our ethnicity, suddenly the whole situation changed completely. The problem changed completely. So this should be made clear. It's not only 1991. It's a longer story. It's about 80 years old, and it's part of the colonial project that was imposed on Africa by colonizing powers. I hope I have somehow made my point, Malada.
You have made,
I don't know if I've made it.
No. You made an excellent point. Thank you for correcting the narrative. It's important that we take it back. I wanted to focus in the present, or focus as early as possible, just to keep it brief. But you're absolutely correct that the seeds of anti-Amhara propaganda and narrative was planted by fascist Italy. And I think there's a misconception amongst Ethiopians, not just Amharas in general, that because we did not experience colonialism in the way that our fellow Africans have experienced it, that we don't suffer from the legacy that other places are suffering from. So this is what is happening to the Amhara people, is a legacy of the attempt of Italian colonizers to
The divided rule.
Their divided rule tactic.
Yeah, and it's the same throughout Africa, by the way. This is not only unique to Ethiopia. This is not something that was specifically directed against Ethiopia. If you look at the Rwanda's case, this the differentiation and the distinction between Hutus and Tutsis came about because it came about because because of the colonial project. It was part of that. If you look at Nigeria, the Biafran War. And the deep-rooted ethnic politics was part of the colonial legacy. If you go to Kenya, the ethnic tension that has always been part of the Kenyan politics is the same. And we know the South African case. When apartheid South Africa tried to pit Koshas against Zulus, when they tried to pit Africans, Black Africans against each other. So this was this is an African story. But what makes it unique in Ethiopia, what makes the Ethiopian experience unique, is that the state has become involved. This idea, this divisive politics has captured the state. It captured the state. This has not happened in other parts of Africa, but in Ethiopia, it was the idea captured the state. It became part of the state. It was sponsored by the state. It was even constitutionally mandated. It became part of the constitution. It defined the constitution. Absolutely. And that makes the Ethiopian experience unique. Absolutely. And that's what's leading us to genocide, unfortunately.
All right, thank you. You gave us a sufficient great synopsis. I think anyone who may be listening who may not be familiar with what's happening to the Amhara people, you gave both the historical background and what's happening currently. Just to bring you back to the current experience of the Amhara people, you have spent the last several years, and I say this in the interest of time. I bring us back to the present in the interest of time. You have spent the last several years close to events on the ground. For someone who is sitting in, Washington, D.C., London, or Geneva, what does life actually look like for ordinary Amharas today? What is the humanitarian situation looking like from your perspective today?
These are two questions. One is that begs a very long response, because I too have become a student. I have learned so much from my experience over the past 4 years, because what I've discovered is that I did not know my people. I did not know Ethiopia. I did not know the country. I did not know how my people lived. I did not know how Ethiopians lived until the experience that I had over the past 4 years, because this is the first time that I had started living in the countryside. I'm a city boy, and then I spent a good part of my life in the States. So what I've discovered is that I barely knew my people. Now I know them, and having come to know them, I have come to sympathize with them even more. With your question, how their life, how they live their life. It's phenomenal. It's quite surprising that any people could be living like this in the 21st century. That's a scandal for the century. Because on the one hand, we're trying to get to Mars. We're trying to colonize Mars. And this is a matter. This goes to how much humanity has advanced over the past years. But then at the same time, the way that we're living in Africa, especially in Ethiopia, in the Amhara region, is also beyond the imagination. I don't know if just words could do justice to really, to really describe the way people live in the countryside. I don't know if I could ever find the appropriate words, the right words, to really, show, to make people understand, the daily life of an Amhara farmer. At least not in my capacity. I don't think I could do that. And I'm someone who was a journalist, who loves crafting words, but I don't think I could really find the words to describe it. And it's tragic. The least I could say is that it's tragic. It's tragic, and I hope that we will be able to be done with this war as quickly as possible. We need a systemic, we need a constitutional, we need a new constitution, we need a new regime. We need to move beyond ethnic politics, and I hope we'll be able to do this. And the only means that we could do this, unfortunately, like I said, is not through peaceful means. I hope we could have been able to do this through peaceful means, but unfortunately, we could not do this because there's a genocidal regime. And we had to resort to a force of arms. I hope we will be able to finish this war as quickly as possible and get down to the real business. And that real business is to change the life of the Ethiopian farmer, of the Ethiopian countryside. Because it's a crime. It's a crime that people should be living like this in the 21st century. Now, having said that, and this tragedy, this tragic life, the crisis that is this daily life of the farmer has, unfortunately, that tragedy has been compounded by the war. It has been even worse by the war. Now, let me, like I said, this begs a very lengthy response, but since we don't have the time, let me be brief as possible.
Okay.
And I have jotted some notes to help me to respond to this question. Now, one thing about this war that's happening in the Amhara region that makes it very unique, not only in Ethiopia but in the African context, is because this is a war that has no clear front line. We don't have a front line. If you look at the Sudanese civil war that's taking place, they have a clear front line. And if you look at most wars that are taking place elsewhere, they have a very clear front line. But in the Amhara region, that's not the case. We have a very decentralized war, and fighting is taking place throughout the region. And the fact that this is happening has meant that millions of people are potentially caught in the crossfire. Because, like I said, fighting is taking place in a very wide area, and unfortunately, this has meant that millions of people on almost basis have become potential victims of crossfire. Having said that, it doesn't end there. The problem doesn't end there. What has happened is that the Ethiopian regime, like any regime in Africa, that is confronted by an unwinnable war, or that is confronted by a war that it's not winning, does what it does, and that is to resort to violence against civilians. It's to accuse the civilians of sympathizing, of aiding and abetting insurgents, and attacking them as revenge, and attacking them in order to terrorize them to submission. So on top of this, of the decentralization of the war, and thus, like I said, of involving millions of people almost on a daily basis in the violence, things have been compounded by the policy of the regime, which is desperate, out of desperation, I should say, out of desperation, to terrorize, to terrorize the population to submission by attacking them. So civilians have become victims extensively in this war. So that's an overriding humanitarian problem that's part of the war in the Amhara region. So we need the involvement of the international community, in this context, so that both sides, and this doesn't mean only the regime but also us, that we should be monitored, that we are safeguarding civilians against in this war. We should be held up to the international standard, because there is the international standard that provides protection for civilians against deliberate violence by combatants, by fighting forces. Unfortunately, this standard that has been set by the international community, and which has an enforcement mechanism, like by institutions like the ICC and the UN and other institutions, and other institutions have unfortunately, but they have absolutely no presence in Ethiopia. They're not even interested in the conflict in Ethiopia. Particularly the conflict in the Amhara region, and we need their involvement. One of the crises of this war is that they have zero interest in this conflict. So it's out of the radar of the international community, and because of this, civilians are suffering. So we need the involvement of the international community in this regard. Please come in and look at what's happened to civilians in this war. Unfortunately, and I should add, to be fair, this part of the reason that the international community is absent is because the Amhara region has become off limits for the international community, both for the international for human rights organizations, for international institutions, and for the international press. The government does not allow the international community to come into the Amhara region. They have been banned. But of course, having said this, this also is not unique. It's the same thing holds throughout all other conflict areas in Africa. What governments do, the first thing that they do is to ban the international community, the international community from covering, from going into those conflict zones, because they want to, perpetuate violence in immunity without the monitoring of the international community. So this is not unique. But what happens, what we have seen in other conflict areas is that the international community finds its own way to go into those conflict areas and monitor what's happening. The fact that governments ban the international community from conflict areas does not mean that the international community has to stay away. There are, multitude of ways that they could go in, and they do so. And they do so in many instances. We know that. Unfortunately, the same thing is not being done in the case of Ethiopia, particularly in the Amhara context. No international press has contacted us and tried to come into the region. Had we been contacted, of course, we could have let them come in. We could have ways that we could have brought them. And, once they come in, they could monitor, they could do their work without interference. We could guarantee them that much, but they're not interested. So they're not here. So, the international community is not here. Not because the government has not because the government has banned them, because they're not, they don't want to be here. They really don't want to be here, because if they do have interest to come in, they would be able to come in, and we would be able to assist them. So, in this regard, like I said, we need the involvement of the international community. We need them to be interested. Once they're interested, we could bring them in, and they could do their work independently and hold the accountable party, according to their finding. If we are, responsible for any crime, we are willing to be held accountable. This is the start of Fano. We are willing to abide by whatever findings that the international community, by independent, come up with once they come in and investigate independently. And the government should also be, of course, the government, of course, will not be interested in this, because it's the primary agent of violations in this conflict. But the fact that it's not willing to be held accountable doesn't mean that it will not be held accountable. Once solid evidences are gathered by the international community, and if they could be proved, the international community has its own way to hold them accountable. So anyway, my point is that millions of civilians have been victimized because of the war in the Amhara region. They deserve the attention of the international community. The international community should come in here, do investigation, and hold whoever is accountable, whichever body is accountable, to account to international law. There should be international law. I mean, there is international law, and there's war has rules. It's not something that we engage in. War should be a standard in war. So there should, wars should have rules, and we do recognize that there are international rules governing war, and we have tried to abide by those rules. Unfortunately, this is not the case. This is not the case on the part of the government, and it should be held accountable. And I should add finally that if we too have shortcomings in this regard, we too should be held accountable. So this is one an outstanding feature of the humanitarian crisis in the Amhara region. And then, there's also, what I call the health and the educational crisis that have been compounded by... Hello?
Yeah, I'm listening. Go ahead. I'm listening. Okay, I was acknowledging.
Okay. Okay, I thought you said that the connection had been cut off.
No,
anyway. No. All right, then let me go ahead. So, and then we have, what I call this health and educational crisis of the health and the educational systems because of the war in Ethiopia. The educational system, we know that has been victimized, has been politicized over the past 3 decades. Ever since the TPLF came to power, ever since, like I said, this ideology of ethnicity had captured the state, and it had been, and the casualty had been quality of education, because especially when it comes to the Amhara region, because it has been labeled as the enemy ethnic group, as the bad guys of history. There has been deliberate to educate the Amhara region. And like I said, unfortunately, this is a three-decade problem of educational quality, of a collapsed educational system. But it has now been further compounded, and it has been further exacerbated by the war. So what's little and sorry states of educational system that we has even been made worse by the war, and the youth in the entire region have become victims. Have become innocent victims of this sorry situation. Unfortunately, we will be feeling the effect of this, of this 20-30 years from now. This is not something that will be over when the war is over. When we are done with the war, this will be. We will feel the impact that of the educational system today. And the government is happy, I should add. The government is happy because it does not want to educate the Amharas in the first place. It does not want to educate the Amharas. This is part of the revenge for their role in history, for their oppressive role in history. And it's happy that the educational system has suffered, and a generation is being victimized in this, and the health system again. There was deliberate attempts by these ethnic-based regimes that had been in power over the past 30 years to deliberately make all institutions in the Amhara region below par, below standard. That has been the case. This is like their a form of reparation for their role in history. The roads are worse in the Amhara region than in other regions. The health system was in worse situation. The education system was in worse situation. This was supposed to be their punishment. And now, because of the war, this has become even worse. And one of the things that we're witnessing on a daily basis is the crisis in the health system. That has completely collapsed, and children are suffering because of that. Infants are suffering because of that. Because before the war had started, there was this program of providing supplementary nourishment to hundreds of thousands of Amhara children, and that has stopped now. Because I was mentioning the living standard, the dire way that the typical Amhara lives in today's age. And one of the things that you see, that you experience is the nourishment. The quality of the food is very low. And one way that this was being addressed was to provide supplementary foods to children, to infants, and that has stopped because of the war. So hundreds of thousands of Amhara children have stopped receiving those supplementary foods, and this will affect their mental development, their physical development. Unfortunately, and this is something that we'll see, well after the effect of this is something that we'll see well after the war is over. And this is a tragic story. So this is one of the humanitarian. One of the humanitarian situations that's taking place in the Amhara region. And I should also point out that the government is receiving assistance from the international community. In the name of the Amhara region, for educational purposes and for health purposes. One of them being, like I said, these supplementary, supplementary foods that was being provided for hundreds of thousands of families. The government has been receiving that for the past 4 years, but it's not controlling the countryside. We don't know where the money that's being allocated for the Amhara region is going, because it does not control the majority of the countryside. It does not control, perhaps, without exaggeration, about 80% of the countryside. So where's the money going? We don't know. So this is something that the international community should look into. This is to say, this is not to say that the assistance should stop. We're just saying that the assistance should be given to those bodies that will be able to deliver it to the people. It's not about stopping the assistance. The assistance is very necessary. We need money to build up the schools. We need, money for equipment in the schools. We need money to train good teachers, qualified teachers. We need money to provide health assistance to hundreds of thousands of families, to millions of families, because their poverty, like I said, could not be described in words. We need the assistance of the international community. But the international community should make sure that what assistance that they're providing gets to gets to the people. Will be able to deliver it to the people. In the name of the Amhara region, of the Amhara people, should be clear. It's not able to deliver it. It's not only a question of wanting or not to. It's not able to deliver those assistance, because it does not control the countryside. And this is an important concern. So the international community should be working with Fano. And this has been the case during we know that this has happened. The same thing has happened during the Derg era, when the EPLF, the Eritrean organization that was fighting against the Derg, and the TPLF were controlling much of the countryside in Eritrea and Tigray. What the international community did was, when there was this huge humanitarian crisis that was happening because of famine, because of developing famine in those areas, and I think this was in the mid-1980s. What the international community did, was, it recognized at that point that the Derg regime, the power, the government in power at the time, would not be able to deliver, what assistance the people needed in Eritrea and Tigray. So what they did was they started working with the Eritrean organizations. They started working with the Tigray organizations, with the TPLF. And those organizations, because they control the countryside, were able to deliver the aid to the people in need. And the same thing should be happening in the Amhara region, and whatever assistance the people need. It's Fano that will be able to deliver those assistance to the people. So I think in this regard, there should be even more aid from the international community to come into Ethiopia. By the way, I don't think it's enough. I don't think that the assistance that the international community gives to Ethiopia is even enough. So this is not about cutting aid. This is about delivering aid to the people effectively. So I think in that regard, in terms of effectively distributing assistance, I think that should be reviewed by the international community. But I see the crisis every single day, and millions of people are suffering because of it. And I should also, speak about the food security crisis that's happening throughout the Amhara region. And this is another tragic story, because before the war started, 4 years ago, about 4 years ago now, in the Amhara region, and before the government lost control of the countryside, there were millions of people that were dependent on food aid in the Amhara region. I think over 2 million people, if I'm not mistaken. But in million, the number is in millions. So there's over the past 4 or 5 decades, the Amhara region, pockets in the Amhara region have always been, there has always been food deficiency. Because of deprivation of the ecology. There are pockets that are not able to feed them because degradation, erosion, deforestation. So the land is poor. It's not able to grow enough food. And what happened over the past 5 decades is that this very effective food distribution system has been set up. So even though food deficiency is part of daily existence in the region, that food deficiency had not developed into hunger. So there's a difference between food deficiency and hunger. The fact that there's food deficiency doesn't mean that there would be hunger, because there was, like I said, a very effective mechanism to monitor food self-sufficiency and intervene before it develops into hunger. Unfortunately, what the war has done is to dismantle this mechanism that prevents food deficiency into developing into hunger, because the government has lost control of the countryside. So what has happened over the past 4 years is that the food deficiency has stayed, but the mechanism that prevents it from developing into hunger has collapsed, has been dismantled. Because the state has collapsed, the regional state has collapsed. So what do we have? So what do we have now? What has occurred because of that? We have hidden hunger. There's hunger in the Amhara region for the past 4 years, but this hunger is a hidden hunger, and millions of people are suffering because of that. And we will see the effect of this hidden hunger 20, 30 years from now. So this is a very touching and tragic aspect of the war, and it should be addressed. It should be. Are you there?
I'm still listening.
Are you there, Malika?
Yes, I am still listening.
I'm sorry. Because
you're fine.
I thought we had. Yeah. Okay. So there's hunger and millions of people are being victimized. I mean, how could we stand a hungry child in this age, Malika? That's very painful.
Horrific.
That's emotionally painful. Yeah. There's a hungry child in the Amhara region at the present moment because the mechanism has collapsed. The distribution mechanism has collapsed. The monetary mechanism to prevent hunger has collapsed, and we are tolerating that situation at the present moment. The international community has tolerated that situation. It hasn't come in. It knows that that the region relies on this mechanism to prevent hunger, and despite that, it has stayed away. And shame to the international community for doing that, because the result has been a hidden hunger that has victimized too many children, millions of children, and we should get to them. We should reach out to them as soon as possible. And to do this, it's necessary that the international community should work with Fano, because the government, like I said, I keep repeating this, because the government has lost control of the countryside. So there's hunger in the Amhara region. So this is one aspect of the humanitarian crisis that the international community should know, and the international press in particular. This is a huge story for the international press. It's a huge story. Hunger is a huge story in this age. Like I said, this is an age in which mankind is trying to colonize Mars, and we tolerating Malada. Perhaps the only thing I should add, it's a crisis, if we could call it a crisis, this lack of visibility, despite the humanitarian crisis that have detailed, the lack of visibility, the lack of interest on the part of the international press, that by itself is a crisis. This total absence in what's happening in the Amhara region in terms of the humanitarian situation. And I'm not even speaking about the political and military, aspect of the war. This is specifically about the humanitarian story.
Yes. Should I continue? Okay, thank you. What you have described, Eskinder, is obviously horrific. You're describing a dire humanitarian situation. We read these things. I read the information that you provided as data, but when you present it from an emotional perspective as someone who is there, it is completely different. Earlier you mentioned 2 million people in the Amhara region require or rely on food aid. You're correct. It's 2.2 3 million people in Ethiopia's Amhara region rely on aid to survive. And there are, as of mid-2025, over 500,000 displaced people in the Amhara region. And these are, I'm sure these numbers are not accurate. They're usually understated when international organizations report. We're looking at a situation in which we can only describe as hazardous. It's a catastrophe. It's horrific. And as you mentioned, there has been no meaningful international intervention. And one thing that hasn't been pointed, that you actually pointed out, is that the regime is weaponizing aid. Is weaponizing this system. It wants or it benefits from ensuring that education, health infrastructure, every aspect of life in the Amhara region or for the Amhara people is eroded, completely eradicated. And it is one of the reasons why we held Amhara Genocide Awareness Month, because we want the focus to be about the people in the severe humanitarian crisis, the genocidal crisis that is taking place. I think you have addressed all of my question. The only thing I want to ask you, Eskinder, go ahead. You're cutting it a little bit. Go ahead.
Let me add one thing to just to what you just said, if you don't mind.
Of course, no, not at all.
Okay, Malada, you mentioned about weaponizing hunger, weaponizing aid, weaponizing these humanitarian issues by the state, and this is the norm in other parts of Africa too. This is not unique to the government, by the way. This is not unique to the Ethiopian region. But having said that, we should always keep in mind that in addition to using to weaponizing humanitarian issues to win the war, to coerce the population into submission, to terrorize them into submission. In addition to that, which is the norm in Africa, for the regime, and this is the story. This is the reason. These ethnic, these people who are blinded by their ethnic based hate against the Amharas. This is also historical reparation. This is punishment for what the Amharas, for the bad things that Amharas did in history. And this is the unique part of the Amhara story. This is the unique part of the Ethiopian story. So for the government, the fact that the people are suffering because of the war, the fact that the people have been victimized. Yes, it's like I said, it's to alienate them from insurgents. Yes, there's also that story. But most importantly, like I said, this is about reparation. And this gives it that's the nasty twist to the story, to Ethiopian politics. This is the kind of mentality that would lead to genocide if it's not checked. If we do not put an end to it, the end of the story of this delight that they have in seeing the Amhara suffer, supposedly for the historical injustices that they have done, will not stop here. The end results, the end of this process, the end of this kind of thinking would be genocide. The kind of genocide that we have seen in Rwanda, Malida. So this is an important point that should be taken into account by Ethiopians in general, and the international community.
Thank you, Eskinder. You're absolutely correct. This is a time period in history that they will again say never again. If you recall, in 1996 when the Rwandan genocide took place, the Clinton administration, I believe, gave an order to the State Department, gave order to the media not to call it a genocide. And later, Bill Clinton himself personally apologized for that decision, and they promised never again. It is happening once again. And you have mentioned that there's complete invisibility. They are, I believe, aware of it, not to be conspiratorial. I believe that they are aware of it. And in this day and age, as you know, genocide is heavily politicized. Moral appeal in the era, I'm sure you understand the current political climate, moral appeal is no longer sufficient. So what is our responsibility as people, as a diaspora community who live in safety and to a great extent privilege? What is it that we need to do in this moment to ensure that the international community listens we can no longer, given the gravity of the situation, we can no longer make a moral appeal. We have to make a demand based on everything that you have said. So what is our responsibility, especially the youth? What message do you have to the diaspora, if any?
Well, the persistence. We need to persist. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind, because we're not the only story that's being ignored in Africa. Yeah. We're not the only ones who are claiming genocide, by the way. There are others who are claiming genocide. And all when it comes to this, when I specify this lack of interest. So we need to understand it in its broader context and persist in changing that norm in the African, in the African context broadly, but specifically, it should start with Ethiopia, because the genocide threat is higher in Ethiopia than other regions. I say this. I could go into the details. Really, the threat of genocide is at a much higher level in Ethiopia than than it is in other areas, because we have, like I said, we have this ethnic-based hysteria has captured the state. That's not the case. It has not. That's not the case in other instances. So we need to persist. We need to persist and keep pointing without antagonizing them. There's no. We will not benefit by antagonizing the international community. We just need to convince them, and that will take patience. That will take persistence, and that takes an acumen. We need to be creative in our ways. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for us. We should take it that way. It's a huge challenge, and we should be able to beat that challenge, to win that challenge, and it could be done. It's doable, because we know that particularly the West is well-meaning in its intention. They have no malice. They have no malice against Africans or Ethiopians. If we could make a good point, they could be convinced. They have, ultimately, we know that there are many good people in the West. There are more good people in the West than bad people, and we just need to convince them. And once they are convinced, they are a tremendous force for good. By the way, they could change things. They would be able to help us to change things. So we should have this positive attitude towards the international community. It's our state of mind, is important. I should say, and we should, change them. Let's learn from the insurgency, from the history of insurgency during the dark times. What's the point, or the juncture where things really started to change for the TPLF and the EPLF was at that point that they were able to convince the Americans, the West, that they are the good guys, and that there was the bad guy. This happened during sometime during the mid 1980s, when there was, like I mentioned earlier, when this huge humanitarian crisis erupted in the northern parts of the country. And we should be able, to do the same thing. And they were Marxists, by the way. And the incredible part of that story is that the insurgents, that was the Eritrean insurgents and the Tigray insurgents were Marxists, and then still they were able to convince Westerners that they are really worthy of engagement, and that they are better than the Derg regime. And if that was possible, I think our task would be much easier. So our responsibility, the responsibility of the diaspora, which I was once upon a time I was part of that diaspora. Mm-hmm. So I know of its potential. I know what it's able to do. Mm-hmm. Once it's mobilized too, if we mobilize the diaspora, it's a huge force for good. It has this huge power that has been underutilized. I have seen this, this huge potential, go some way into doing something. This was during the 2005 election. We have seen its power at that point, and it has gone down to great things. So the responsibility of the diaspora would be to convince the international community without giving up, without thinking that this is something that could be done easily, with recognizing that it's a huge challenge, that it will take all our effort, all our combined effort to do the job. So to this end, I think it should be done. not going to get everyone on board from the very beginning. Success is what would bring others on board as we go along. This has to be started by few people. All great things have been started by few people, and then people start adding up as things proceed. And we should understand that, and we should be able to start something with few people, and bring along people. And bring people on board for our success. So that's I hope I've gone some way into giving you some.
No, that's great. No, that's great feedback, because you just gave me reasons to not give up, and I'm sure many people have felt defeated in hearing that it's a marathon, it's a long process. Will revive their courage and their desire to do the work. I know while you were here, where are we in time, by the way? I don't want to take up too much of your time, Eskinder.
I really have to go, because I've been standing here for almost 2 hours. Our fight is not only about the past, about the past in the sense, this is not only about accounting for the crimes that have been perpetrated against Amharas on the basis of their ethnicity. This is like you have mentioned it earlier about this mass killings in Wallaka. And we all know about the incident in which thousands of people were massacred on a single day. Thousands of children and women, mostly women, children, and the elderly. This is not only about them. Of course, it's also about them. About them. This is about accounting for their loss of life. For their victimization. Yes, the struggle is also about them. It's also not only about the present. Because the state is engaged in the genocidal war in the Amhara region. Yes, the story is also, our struggle is also part of the present. It's also part of the past. But most importantly, it's about the future. It's about, preventing genocide on a massive scale. And, the international community, because you have to read into genocide to recognize what genocide is. Because most people, the most common mistake about genocide that most people make is that, people think that genocide takes place when they see hundreds of thousands of victims lying on the ground, massacred. As it happened in Rwanda. Unless people see that, people don't think that genocide had taken place. No, that's not the case for genocide, because genocide occurs in the thought process. By the way, we say that genocide. There's a genocidal act when it starts in the thought process. When there's to murder people on the basis of their identity. That's where genocide starts. That's when we say that there's a genocidal threat. But of course, things have developed much further in the Amhara case than this. But it's important to note and to remember that genocide does not occur. We do not say that the genocide occurs when there are hundreds of thousands of corpses. We say that genocide is really a thought. It's a thought process. That's where we should fight it. So this struggle, the most important part of our struggle, of the present armed struggle that we're waging in the Amhara region, is about preventing genocide in the future. Preventing, those hundreds and millions, hundreds of thousands and millions of corpses laying on the ground. That's really the most important part of our struggle, because we have a state, we have people in power that are prepared, that are, that have the mentality to do that. So, that's what the international community, that's the message that should reach the international community. We should understand genocide in its entirety. We should not only recognize genocide at its end results, which is, the murder of millions of people, which is about seeing corpses, hundreds of thousands of corpses laying on the ground. But that's the end result. We should recognize, like I said, genocide when it starts creeping in the mind. And this is what really the most important aspect of our fight is about that. It's about the people, the mentality, the ideology, the hate of the people in power in Addis Ababa, in the region. They are genocidal because they have a corrupted mind. They have a genocidal mind. They have a genocidal ideology. They have a genocidal reading of it. Hello.
Sorry, Eskinder, I think you can.
So I think we're about done.
All right, thank you so much, Eskinder. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I just want to say thank you for your honesty, for your time, and for your continued time and service for our people. This conversation was heavy, it was painful, but it was necessary, and that is the honest truth of what's happening to the Amhara people. And as graphic and as horrific as it sounds, we must listen to it. And whatever political view people have, no human being should ignore the suffering of civilians. And this cannot just remain a conversation. We must take action to ensure the world listens and takes action against Amhara genocide. Again, I want to personally thank you, Eskinder. I express my appreciation continuously, especially for your integrity and for your commitment to the Amhara people and Ethiopians at large. I know you'll be here for a Q&A with the public.